Hey there people, so today we are going to give you the complete guide to all the flails in Terraria. We'll talk about the best flails, and particularly the Flairon versus the Solar Eruption towards the end. Flails are melee weapons. There are two types, thrown flails and launched flails. So thrown flails can be fired once and then swung around continuously by holding the attack button. They ricochet off walls, pierce and damage enemies even when sitting on the ground. So they'll pierce multiple enemies, and even if they're just sitting there, if enemies walk into them, they'll hurt that enemy. As long as you're holding that attack button down upon contact, they'll be damaged. So launch flails, on the other hand, do not pierce or stay out by holding the button, but instead they fire rapidly and are unaffected by gravity. Most of the thrown flails generally are affected by gravity. So the launch flails will fire and retract. Most of them will auto-fire or auto-swing, which makes them very effective at short range. So let's break it down into pre-hard mode and hard mode. In pre-hard mode, the lowest level one, if you like, that you're probably going to get is the chain knife. It is the only pre-hard mode launched flail. It does not have auto-fire, unlike most launched flails. It has a mere 11 base damage, but it has a very fast use time of 19. So here it is. And yeah, I have to keep clicking to keep firing this, but you know, early on, like very early on in the game, this actually can be pretty useful. It has a 1 in 250 chance to be dropped by cave bats if you're in the cavern layer way underground, and also it can be spawned by cave bats that are spawned by the bat statue. So if you set up a statue, I've got a shark statue over here, but if you set up a statue, a bat statue specifically, and wire it to a switch or a timer or something, you can actually use that to get this weapon as well. Although early in the game you might not be doing that, but you could. Okay, so second one we're going to talk about is the Ball o' Hurt, and this is available only in Corruption Worlds. It's thrown for constant damage. So as I say, the chain knife is the only launched one in pre-hard mode. The Ball o' Hurt, you can see swings like that, and as I was talking about with the thrown flails, it only just has to sit there and it'll still damage enemies. So normally that's why I put this platform under here so I could show you that, but yeah, and you see they are affected by gravity, so if you're not standing on solid ground, it's just gonna kind of dangle there. But that's why I put this little platform underneath, and it'll just sit there. And same thing if you're standing on regular flat ground, you can actually just hold it out, and if enemies walk into it, they will be damaged. So the Ball o' Hurt in specific has a 15 base damage and a 44 use time. That use time is the same for most of the thrown flails. The Ball o' Hurt is obtained by smashing a shadow orb in the corruption, or you can also get it from corrupt crates by fishing in the corruption as well. Now the Crimson counterpart, you'll notice there's a space missing here. The Crimson counterpart I am going to show you is called the Meatball, and it's actually slightly more damaging at 16 base damage rather than 15. Unlike its counterpart, it is crafted from 10 Crimtane bars and 5 tissue samples at an iron or lead anvil. And of course, a hard mode anvil will work as well. So we've got that here. I've got my 10 Crimtane bars and 5 tissue samples, and we can craft the Meatball, and that's why that wasn't there yet, because I want to show you that. So same idea. It's just the Crimson variant. It does 1 more base damage. And yeah, if it's not, you know, if the enemy's not touching it, it's not going to do damage. But as you can see, they will pierce through whatever enemies are within their range. And if it happens to be sitting where an enemy hits it, it'll do damage. And interestingly, like, you'll notice it'll kind of just dangle there. But if you jump around, you can also swing it. If you move around or jump around, you can effectively swing it. It has kind of a pendulum sort of thing going on. Yeah, and then if you stop moving, it'll just sit there. But if you move again, basically that's, you know, like actual real life flails, actually. That's sort of how they work. They're, you know, a thing on a chain. Anyway, yeah, so moving right along, we've got a couple more in pre-hard mode. The Blue Moon. This has a higher base damage of 23, and also it emits light when it's used. You can kind of see the sparkles here. Of course, it's daylight. But yeah, this can be a little useful exploring underground and stuff like that, or at least you can kind of see what you're doing. when you're using it, because it does emit light as well. And of course, that higher base damage is a pretty big difference, 23 instead of 15 or 16. It is found in gold chests in the dungeon. It can also be found in golden lock boxes from fishing for dungeon crates. If you get dungeon crates, they'll generally have one golden lock box with one item in it. So you can get it that way as well. But generally, you're more likely to be getting it in a gold chest when you first get into the dungeon. And you unlock those chests, of course. So last proper flail in hard mode is the Sunfury. And this is quite powerful, actually. It's 35 base damage on the updated platforms. That's the PC 1.3 and equivalent. PS4 and Xbox One for now, coming to mobile, Switch, and so on. Yeah, and it's 33 base damage if your platform has not got that update. It also emits light and can light enemies on fire, as you can see. That's the on fire debuff, but basically it's lighting them on fire. And otherwise it works the same. 35 base damage makes it pretty powerful. It's obtained from shadow chests in the underworld. It is the best pre-hard mode flail, and it's actually good, effective against the wall of flesh if you're in normal mode. Expert mode, it becomes less effective, but for normal mode, it's pretty effective against the wall of flesh. You can take out the hungry and do some damage with all that. So I'm going to tell you about one more thing, though. The Harpoon, this is kind of an honorable mention because technically this is not a flail because it does range damage. You'll see if I open up my inventory, these all do melee damage, and so proper flails are melee damage. This does range damage, but it actually works a lot like a flail, so I'm going to mention it here. It acts basically like a launched flail, similar to, well, not exactly like the chain knife, but it is the launch type. You can see, and it does have auto fire, unlike the chain knife. So I can just hold the button down, and the auto fire ones, basically you just hold it down. See, the rate of hitting is dependent on how close you are. So it basically works like a launched flail. But it's worth mentioning, it's a projectile on a chain, and it's effective against early bosses, and it's the same idea. It works like a flail, it just does ranged damage. So if you have like a ranged armor set, this can be useful, even as a backup weapon. And yeah, this is one of the things about some of the launched flails. Some of them are affected by gravity like this, and you can launch them over your enemies, and you can see it will pierce a bunch of enemies on the way back. And you can use that, obviously, against crowds. If you're creative, you might be able to manage to use it against bosses that way as well. Or just, as I say, because it's auto-fire, the closer they get, the more damage they're going to take anyway, just hitting them dead on. So this is 25 base damage. Can hit multiple enemies on the return trip, as I showed you there, and it is dropped by all pre-hard mode Goblin Army enemies. It is not dropped by the hard mode Goblin Summoner, but if you're fighting a Goblin Army in pre-hard mode, you're pretty likely to get one of these. They actually never come with a modifier, but they can be reforged to make them a little more powerful. So there you go. That's all the pre-hard mode ones. And so yeah, let's get into the hard mode ones. I kind of stacked these up here. So yeah, usually I take a little break before I switch these, but hey, we'll just show you. This is what's coming up. All right, and once again, I've left a little gap. We'll get to why. So first we're going to talk about the anchor. The anchor, again, is a launched flail, and these are all once you get into hard mode, of course. It launches an anchor, literally launches an anchor on a chain, basically, and it's similar to the Harpoon that way in that it's affected by gravity, and it's probably most effective, especially against crowds, if you launch it over the enemy. It's not auto fire, actually, so that makes it more like the chain knife in that respect, that you'll need to keep clicking. But yeah, it's 30 base damage and a 29 use time, so it's not that fast actually, but it's reasonably high damage. It's found in wooden crates when you're fishing in hard mode. If you're on mobile, you can also get it as a pre-hard mode angler reward. So on mobile, it's available pre-hard mode. On other platforms, it's hard mode only from the wooden crates in fishing. Mobile, you can also get it as an angler reward. It has unlimited piercing only on its return journey, just like the Harpoon there. And yeah, so again, firing over a group of enemies can make it very effective. Now, KO Cannon. This also is pretty effective. It's also a launched flail. In fact, most of the hard mode ones are launched flails. There's just 2 exceptions, which I'll get to. The KO Cannon launches a boxing glove on a chain, basically. And like some of the other launched flails, this is, you know, obviously more rapid the closer you are. So it does 40 base damage if you're on an updated platform, 35 if you're on a pre-update platform. Auto fire, as I say, based on that distance. It has a relatively short range, and you'll notice it is not affected by gravity. So you can't launch that over your enemies and expect to pierce. It does not do that. But it does have very strong knockback, which can be useful. So this can make it fairly useful in pre-hard mode. The closer your enemies get, obviously, the faster it's going to hit them. And I guess if they're close enough, it can hit an extra one there. So it's a 1 in 1,000 drop from any enemy or NPC, even friendly NPCs, I believe, during a blood moon. So it's a low drop rate, but it effectively becomes common because, of course, during a blood moon, you're fighting a lot of enemies. So I ended up with a few of these. So even though it's 1 in 1,000, because you're going to be fighting a lot of people in the blood moon, there's a reasonable likelihood you'll end up with one of these. Interestingly, it includes critters and enemies spawned by statues, so you can farm for it with even something like a bunny or a fish statue, harmless critters on a timer. There's a way to farm for this as well if you needed to, but if you're playing, if you're fighting some hard mode blood moons, you're pretty likely to end up with one of these. So, moving along, the chain guillotines. These exist only on the updated platforms. Again, PC, PS4, and Xbox One for now, coming to some others. Chain guillotines auto fire chain weapons. So this is more like the KO cannon there. Again, it's not affected by gravity. You'll notice there's more than one projectile actually with these. It's 43 base damage and a very fast 13 use time. So again, that's going to vary. You can see the range is a lot better than the KO cannon, but closer you get in, the faster effectively it's going to be. A little bit. I think because it's got the multiple projectiles, it doesn't have quite that same effect of speeding up as you get closer in. It's basically a hard mode upgrade to the chain knife that I showed you at the very beginning, and it is dropped by corrupt mimics, which makes it available in the corruption only. Now, that mysterious gap there, that's for the Dao of Pao, which is the only craftable hard mode throne flail. There are only 2 hard mode throne flails, and this is one of them. So let's go ahead and craft it first. Dao of Pao, it's crafted from 1 dark shard, 1 light shard, 7 souls of night, and 7 souls of light. And of course, dark shards you will get in corrupt deserts. You can see that actually in the tooltip, sometimes carried by creatures in corrupt deserts. Light shards you will get by creatures in light, in other words, hallowed deserts. So dark deserts are corrupt or crimson, actually, either one. It says corrupt here, but it's actually corrupt or crimson. Generally, the mummies are the most likely one. Depends whether you're on an updated platform or not. Some other enemies can drop them as well. And then the light shards are hallowed deserts, actually, that have been taken over by the hallow, which, of course, expands in hard mode. So you'll get those from light mummies and, again, some other enemies, particularly if you're on an updated platform. Oh, God. Blood Moon. Hey, there you go. So, yeah. Actually, you know what? I want to avoid this, so... Okay, here we go. Interesting that started right towards the end of the night. So we're going to go ahead and craft that Dao of Pao, and as you can see, it has a base of 63 melee damage. And the same, actually, use time as those pre-hard mode throne flails. And it actually has a chance to inflict the confused debuff on enemies. It's a 1/3 chance that it will conflict that. That's the one that basically makes them run away from you. And it has 7 knockback, which is pretty serious. So it's 63 base damage on the updated platforms. It's only 48 base damage on the non-updated platforms. But yeah, it's a thrown flail. You can see it has a bit more velocity maybe, but same effect, and it just has a chance to inflict that confused debuff that causes your enemies to run away from you. So moving right along, Flower Pow is the only other hard mode thrown flail. That's right here, number 5 I've got here. So this does a base of 65 damage on the updated platforms, just a couple more, and 52 on the non-updated platforms. But the advantage of it is it also shoots petals at your enemies, except if you're on Android or iOS, it doesn't shoot the petals, but on other platforms it shoots petals. And interestingly, the weapon itself inflicts melee damage, as the other flails do, but the petals actually inflict range damage, which makes it kind of weird because the weapon itself will take boosts from melee accessories and armor and so on, whereas the petals will get buffs and bonuses from ranged sets and also ranged accessories and so on. So that's kind of odd, but it is dropped by Plantera. The chance is 1 in 7 on the updated platforms or 1 in 6 on the non-updated platforms. And it's actually really hard to see the petals shooting out here. I'm not sure that actually happens against the dummies, but no worries there, because I have created this, my shark spawner, and you can see, yeah, there you go. You can see the petals shooting out there, and so those petals will target the enemy as well and do some additional damage. I believe the damage of the petals is the same as the weapon itself, but again, they're affected by different accessories and equipment, so that can be modified. It's kind of odd. But yeah, there's just 3 left actually. So basically the three best ones arguably. The Golem Fist is launched flail again, so we're back to those. The rest are all launched ones. Launches a large fist on a chain. Bam, right in the face. And yeah, it's auto fire, and so it will do more damage close in as it launches faster. And yeah, it's 76 base damage on the updated platforms, 60 on the non-updated platforms. On the updated platforms, it also has, it's called Insane Knockback, 12 knockback. On the non-updated platforms, it's a very strong ranking of 9 knockback. So it's very, very high knockback either way, really. And yeah, firing rate depends on the distance. It's kind of like an upgraded KO cannon. Again, not affected by gravity. It's not one of those ones that you can, again, launch over top. You can see it has quite the range, but it's not affected by gravity. It doesn't have that effect of being able to put it over top of a crowd and pull it back through them. But yeah, it's still very powerful. And like an upgraded KO cannon, it's a 1 in 8 chance to be dropped by the Golem boss. So it's one of the last ones you can get if you're on a non-updated platform. Again, there's only 2 more that I'm going to talk about anyway. Let's show you how it works against the sharks, though. So you can see it just throws them against the wall with that huge knockback. So yeah, the last 2, and this is the reason that we've got some enemies in here more than anything because of the effects of these. So these are pretty legendary. The Flairon. This is the strongest one if you're on a non-updated platform. It is the strongest flail in the game for the non-updated platforms. It looks like a thrown flail. The icon is like a thrown flail, but you can see that's not actually what it is. It's more like a KO cannon and so on, where it just shoots out and comes back, and all that. So it is auto fire. It's not like super quick in that, but again, you know, the closer in, you're gonna score more hits. Now you may be wondering about those bubbles that are coming out. Let's get to that. So the weapon does 66 base damage, but the bubbles also do 66 base damage, so the exact same as the weapon itself. Those bubbles, if there are actual enemies, will home in on the enemies. So again, this is where we need the sharks. So you can see even if I'm not hitting that enemy, those bubbles are going to home in on the enemy just the same. And so that's what makes it more than anything very, very powerful. And of course, you can get all kinds of accessories, armor, buffs, bonuses that will affect that. Interestingly, though, I believe the bubbles don't. The bubbles don't gain effects from flasks. So you have melee flasks, which will help do extra damage and extra buffs or effects, debuffs against your enemies. Those flasks will work with the weapon itself, but those effects of the flask will not work on the bubbles. So important to know. And those bubbles are based on the time that it's out. So you'll actually notice if I fire moving... Okay, I'm going to need a little more space here. Let's go over here. If I fire moving this way... If I fire moving in the direction of those bubbles, I'm not going to release as many bubbles because it's not out as long. If I fire the other way, it's out longer, and so you'll actually release more bubbles. So that's actually kind of a strategic thing you can do to maximize the bubbles. Effectively, you want to leave that Flairon out longer because the longer it's out, the more bubbles it's going to release. Of course, it auto... goes out and automatically comes back. So the only real effective way to do that is to move away, actually. You'll notice if I'm very close in here, you're not seeing a lot of bubbles. If I'm moving away, it's releasing more and more bubbles. So just a little tip there. The Flairon has a 1 in 5 chance to drop from Duke Fishron. And so yeah, it's, again, most powerful one in the non-updated platforms. You know what, I'm going to finish talking about the Solar Eruption, which is the other one first. And you notice I've got some suspicious looking eyes here. I'm going to show you both of these against the Eye of Cthulhu at the end, because by then it should be nighttime, or at least pretty close. So let's talk about the Solar Eruption. It's on the updated platforms only, PC 1.3 equivalent, PS4, Xbox One, so on. So it is also a launch flail, but it's a little different. You can see there, I'm not moving my cursor, it's just swinging around like that. But it works very similarly to those KO cannon and so on, just a little bit different in that it kind of moves around. Auto swings, a fast moving projection, because it's not really a projectile or a thing on a chain exactly. It just sticks out, so they call it a projection, which deals massive damage. It travels through blocks, actually, which is one of the things that makes this one like undisputably best. You can see it goes right through blocks, and that makes it very useful in certain situations, but it's very useful in general because it has 105 base damage, and it also inflicts the Day Broken debuff, which does additional massive damage. You can see when it first goes out, there are some little explosions there. And you can see that's the Day Broken debuff. It's not on fire, it's more powerful. It does 25 damage per second. And those explosions, actually, when you're hitting one big enemy or multiple enemies, those explosions will basically cause that same debuff on neighboring enemies as well. So yeah, it's very, very powerful. It can do up to 2500 DPS without modifiers. It's very useful against the Moon Lord, and also Martian saucers. It would be very useful because of those attacks that go through walls, and because both of those enemies, a lot of their attacks will not go through walls. You can basically just build a box around yourself and just stab them with this through that wall, and they won't be able to hit you a lot. Those are a couple enemies that their attacks don't go through the walls. So yeah, very useful late in the game. Obviously emits light as well, so you can use it for exploration if you're doing that still at that point. And it's also good for cutting plants because you just stab it out there, it cuts all the plants. And it does move up and down a little bit, but not too much. It is crafted from 18 solar fragments at the Ancient Manipulator. I did stick some in my inventory just so I can show you that. Solar Eruption, 18 solar fragments at your Ancient Manipulator. Of course, all that stuff is only if you're on the updated platforms. So that requires defeating the Lunatic Cultist, which is only on the updated platforms, and then you also have to defeat the Solar Pillar during the lunar events that happen after defeating the Cultist, and that is all the stuff that you're going to have to do to get those 18 solar fragments and your Ancient Manipulator. The fragments come from the Solar Pillar, the Ancient Manipulator comes from the Lunatic Cultist, so you can make this before Moonlord, and you can use it to fight the Moonlord, and if you're a melee player, that's probably going to be your best option. And it's one of the best options in general, because again, you can basically build a box around yourself, maybe with a little pool of honey and whatever other stuff to give you some buffs and boosts and, you know, heart statues and that kind of stuff. And yeah, it's actually highly effective in that situation. So Solar Eruption, obviously on the updated platforms, is the best flail. I'm just going to cut this and wait until nighttime, and I'm going to show you both the Flairon and the Solar Eruption against the Eye of Cthulhu. Alright, it's almost nighttime. I actually forgot as well. I should show you these against the sharks. So, yeah. Sharks don't stand a chance against the Solar Eruption. Alright, so let's summon the Eye of Cthulhu. And we'll use our Flairon first of all. Where you at? Where you at? And you don't even necessarily have to hit the enemy with the Flairon, because again, those homing bubbles, it's just gonna annihilate them anyway. So let's just resummon it and Solar Eruption. Come on, buddy. Nothing to fear here. So as you can see, both incredibly powerful weapons that take out the Eye of Cthulhu in seconds. So I hope you liked the video. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.